scare you? So loud. Oh my gosh. So hello, everybody. We're live now. Welcome to my channel. My name is Patricia Meredith, and I'm an author of historical mysteries, and I've been greatly influenced by a lot of the classics, especially Jekyll and Hyde. And I'm very excited because I've done last month, I did a live conversation with three fellow booktubers, Tori Talks, She's Only Evie, and Kay's Hidden Shelf. And so if you want to go find that, that's another great conversation. So when we're done here, go look up that video. You can find it in my playlists. And we had a great conversation about Jekyll and Hyde. And then Corin, my editor, was watching, and he had some other thoughts. And we got into a whole conversation afterwards. And we were like, okay, let's just keep talking about Jekyll and Hyde. I've already read the book, so we can have another live discussion and then continue on, though. We were very excited to kind of get into it, and so we decided we're going to do a whole 19th century horror reading list, buddy read. So we're starting with Jekyll and Hyde, and then next month we're going to do Dracula, and then we're going to do Frankenstein, and then we're going to do some Poe, some of my favorite Poe stories. I'm so excited. So this will be my first time reading, I think, Dracula all the way through. And definitely it's my first time reading Frankenstein all the way through. So I'm excited to do that. But today I'm very excited to dive into Jekyll and Hyde again with my fellow Whitworth University graduate, Corin Faye. Corin and I have known each other since 2006. I'm dating us.
Yes.
We're getting old. Yeah. So, but we graduated together in 2008.
Yes.
Graduated, right? So we both graduated with writing degrees. So forewarning, we are writing lit majors who are going to get deep into critical analysis. We love doing this. We love critiquing work. So Corin, tell us a little bit about what you're working on right now and where are you from and where are you at right now and all that good stuff.
Yeah. So, I'm from this Tacoma area originally, the Seattle area. That's where I grew up. And I'm living in San Diego right now. I'm loving the California sunshine in the winter. And I'm a freelance editor at the moment and also working on my own creative projects. So I have like 4 different projects that I'm working on at the moment, and I am constantly planning to finish them all next month. Yes. So that's and next month it'll be next month, but at some point I will finish them.
Somehow you're doing that in between editing my books and Andrew, my husband's books. And I mean, you're working for other people too, right? Or is it mostly just us right now?
It's you and Andrew right now.
Yeah. So, we're your VIP clients there.
Yes. So, yeah. And you guys have quite a busy publishing schedule this spring, so it'll be fun kind of like doing our Dracula horror and then going and doing your mystery and then Andrew's fantasy. It'll be like quite a genre.
A genre flip back and forth.
Yeah.
And now for Jekyll and Hyde, I think you said you ended up reading it 3 times.
Yeah, I did. I'd never read it before. Yeah. And when I watched the previous discussion, and it really intrigued me. And so I think we had a few like Marco Polo like sessions where we talked about it a little bit, and then you're like, let's talk about this together.
Yeah.
And then I got a copy of it, and I read it like 3 times. It's very short, but it's like so jam-packed that, and even now it's like I want to read it a few more times before having this talk. So it's like I feel like I'm in the middle of thinking about it, but that's good.
Yeah, it'll be exciting to get into Dracula. Are you going to read Dracula 3 times? I don't think we have time for that.
5 times as long as this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we've got some praise here for you. Good editor based on their books. So
thanks.
You are an excellent editor. I just, I can't say enough like how you have made my books what they are. They are definitely due to you. There are so many of your comments that have made me like the second book in particular, I think about Cupboards All Bared. You had me like rewrite, gosh, was it Peter? I had to completely rewrite him. And there were like different sections that I had to completely rewrite based on your comments, but I'm so glad that I did because it's such a better book for it. So
yeah. Oh, yeah. And I love reading and editing your stuff.
Oh, thank you.
Delightful stories. So yeah.
Thank you. So yeah, so let's see. I've got a couple family members over there, so they're all saying hi. So yes, there is an audio version of Jekyll and Hyde. If you're looking to listen to a an audiobook reading of Jekyll and Hyde, I found a couple that were on through the library. That's how I do most of my audiobooks. Did you end up listening to an audiobook, Corin, or did you just
No, I just read the
actual? So yeah, so I think both of us ended up reading this one. This is The Essential Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This one is annotated, so it's got all these lovely footnotes, and half of the page is footnotes on the history behind it. But I think you said you got a little distracted by that, so you switched.
Yes, I did. Yeah, I'm glad I read the annotated version. I think I would have preferred not reading it the first time around. That was my first read.
Yeah.
So the footnotes, I can't help but get distracted by them. So I switched over. Yeah.
Exactly. Oh yeah. Andrew is saying, so this is my husband, Andrew D. Meredith. You can go give him a follow over on his channel. He also does audiobook recordings. So if you're looking for somebody to do audiobook recordings, he does an excellent job. I'm not biased at all, but we are talking about doing some audiobook readings of some classics that are in the public domain. And so Jekyll and Hyde is definitely one that Andrew would love to do and write an introduction to it. He's had ideas for a play of Utterson. So it's all kind of like Wicked, where you take a step back and you do another version of it. So eventually, maybe I'll just do a third video and I'll have a buddy talk with Andrew about Jekyll and Hyde. We'll just keep talking about Jekyll and Hyde all the time. So, okay. So where do you want to start, Corin? What's like the first thing that jumps out to you that you want to discuss?
Oh my gosh, there's so much, Trisha. I'm not sure. Can you pick something?
Well, at one point before we started, you were talking about the theme of justice. So that was something I definitely want to unpack. So yeah, you describe it. You had a good.
Yeah. So I just noticed, the story goes back and forth in terms of how justice is perceived. Like Jekyll talks to the lawyer Utterson and wants justice for Hyde, even though Hyde is actually committing injustices. Right. There's still the sense of but if you really know him, somehow you will want to do this kind of right by him. That's doesn't make a lot of sense when it comes to the law, but there's kind of this internal sense of no, if you know my story and if you know who I am, there will be a way of sort of doing justice to me. And Utterson is the lawyer, and so he's kind of in the midst of all these relationships, and he's trying to kind of figure out why Henry Jekyll is leaving all of his earthly possessions to Mr. Hyde. And
by the way, sorry, real quick. This is not going to be a spoiler-free discussion, everybody. So hopefully you know the twist of Jekyll and Hyde and you know how it ends. Because we're just going to totally unpack it. And if you've never read it, hopefully it'll encourage you to dive in and read it for yourself. So just forewarning. So you can go ahead and talk about Jekyll is Hyde. They are the same person. And so that's the big reveal. Most people know that now because it's just everybody is familiar with Jekyll and Hyde, even if they've never read the story. They basically know that twist. So that's part of the whole justice thing is you take Utterson because he's the only one. So he's the person telling the story for most of it, right? We have the two letters at the end, but the rest of the book is told from Utterson's point of view, third person. So we're not really in his head, but we are. And so, so he is that step back to kind of examine what does justice look like with Jekyll and Hyde when they're the same person.
Yeah. And he's also trying to, do justice to Jekyll and is really concerned about him because he's leaving, before he knows that they're the same person, Jekyll is leaving a will, all of his fortune is going to go to this guy that people think is wanted for murder after Hyde has, committed some of his crimes. And so there's just, a sense of, what does it mean to do right by someone? What does it mean to we can unpack that more as we go along. It's kind of a deep thing to dive into. And it's kind of references to law and justice are sort of interspersed throughout the book. So there's no single quote to go to, just
right.
Yeah, I just thought it was an interesting theme.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it goes with the whole, the nature of duality. That's another theme. There's all these, the way the houses are described, the way that the people are described is it's constantly, well, there's this aspect, but there's also this aspect. So even Jekyll himself, when he's talking about the good versus evil, and
Yeah.
trying to pull the evil. What he's trying to do is remove the evil part of himself and separate it from the good part of himself.
Yeah.
And because of exactly that, the justice angle, right?
Yeah.
He thinks, well, then Hyde can get away with murder, literally murder, and anything else that he plans on doing and having fun with, and Jekyll will never have to be held responsible for those actions.
Yeah.
Right? He can
Yep.
continue in his daily life and not have to worry about that because, well, that's Hyde. They're looking for Hyde. They're not looking for me.
Mhm.
And so, very, yeah, very, very. He has completely split himself from this other person, because he doesn't want the justice to fall on him. But what he discovers is that that's not how it works. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's the whole crux of the problem, is that we get to the point where they have split, but then Hyde starts taking over, and he murders, and he does all these terrible things, and Jekyll realizes he still feels responsible, and he should still feel responsible because it is him.
Yeah.
But the way it's written the whole time is as though there's this other person that Jekyll has in his life, as though there's this, like a friend, as though you were committing murder and I didn't. Oh, well, I don't feel responsible for you, Corin, but so you go ahead and do your thing. Right.
Yeah.
But in the end, I do feel responsible. And I mean, I think it does happen that way. Like if you started committing murder, Corin, I would feel responsible. And I hope that if I started committing murder, you would feel responsible and come and stop me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do think it's interesting in the story that at the beginning, Utterson is described as a guy who is often sort of the last good friend of people who are going downhill, but he's also sort of indifferent to them. Like it says he doesn't judge them, but he doesn't try to stop them or save them. Not until Jekyll does he try to really intervene in someone's life, which I thought was a really interesting development in his character.
Mm-hmm.
And that's partly like what got me thinking about the whole idea of law was, well, he's a lawyer, and part of it's that he has a responsibility to the law.
But does he? Because from the first time we're described, Utterson is described for us. He is described as a friend and before he's a lawyer, right? So I think right there he has the let's see, let me find it, because it's like from the very first. Yeah, I love his. Okay, so first line, right? Mr. Utterson, the lawyer, was a man of a rugged countenance that was never lighted by a smile, cold, scanty, and embarrassed in discourse, backward in sentiment, lean, long, dusty, dreary, and yet somehow lovable. I love that. Something eminently human beckoned from his eye. Skipping down, he had an approved tolerance for others, inclined to help rather than to reprove. He says, I incline to Cain's heresy, he used to say quaintly. I let my brother go to the devil in his own way. So even as a lawyer, he's letting them get away with stuff. He's the friend that they go to cover up their indiscretions, right?
Oh.
Which is so against a lawyer's, at least I would hope, that a lawyer would feel more of a sense of justice. I guess the question becomes, how do you define justice?
Yeah, I didn't get that from the beginning. I didn't.
Okay.
I saw him as someone who would be indulgent to friends, but if they had been his clients, he would not have, maybe. So,
okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't have gotten that he was kind of indulging their legal unscrupulousness. It's
yeah.
I always got
he would have called them out if it was illegal, but if it wasn't above or below the law, he would have just let them do it.
Kind of. I mean,
right?
Maybe that's just my estimation of his character in general, that he has integrity, but he also kind of has a hands-off approach to people unless he's for some reason directly responsible for them, which he feels in Jekyll's case. Yeah, but I could be wrong because
because he's his friend and lawyer. So there's a point where
he's responsible for the will, for the distribution of the money and the
But then because Jekyll isn't the one who commits murder, right? It's Hyde. So so it becomes he's more concerned about making sure that Jekyll isn't being, in fact, it seems like he's trying to make sure that Jekyll doesn't feel like he's responsible for Hyde, right? That he needs to let Hyde remove himself from his life. Don't pay for him. Don't right? Because it all starts because of a check.
Yeah.
Because he covers for Hyde.
Yep.
With a check with his name on it. And so then we know that Jekyll and Hyde are connected, but we don't know how.
Yeah, although I thought that there was already a will that had left things to, so that Utterson would
So it
already.
starts with Utterson knows that he wrote a will to Mr. Hyde, but he doesn't know who Mr. Hyde is.
Okay.
Just the benefactor of this will.
Mm-hmm.
So good
Okay.
for him. Some friend of this wealthy scientist is going to get everything, right?
Yeah.
But then he learns who Hyde is, and he becomes concerned.
Yeah.
About who, why are you leaving everything to somebody who he sees as evil?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. The story is really concerned with inheritance for sure.
Yes.
This might be a little bit too like epic, but it made me wonder if on some level there's not a question of like who inherits the earth. Is it the good or the bad, the wicked or the just? Because it's all about this inheritance and trying to figure out the exact terms of the will, and Utterson feeling responsible for that, even though he really has no control over it. But that just kind of made me wonder if Stevenson wasn't sort of involving larger aspects of human fate in the discussion.
Right.
Yeah. So, the meek, it also reminded me of the Beatitudes, Jesus talking about the meek inheriting the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And how this is taking that and sort of questioning, not necessarily questioning the Bible, because he doesn't really write directly about the Bible, but just
right.
that question of like, who is going to actually triumph in the long run? Who is going to be,
Does good always overcome evil? And that's definitely a question, because the way that it's written is Hyde gets stronger.
Yeah.
Right. His evil. So Jekyll and Hyde. And even then there's the question of, does he really separate the evil from the good? It's not like Jekyll is pure good. It's almost like there might have been a third aspect, right? Could he have split it further? Once he removed Hyde, could he then have removed the really good part of himself? And then he would have had this like third person that's kind of in between, getting into the metaphysical part of it, it's not real. And that's the biggest complaint when you read like the reviews from the day. It's all like, well, it's impossible. You couldn't actually do that. And it's yes, thank you for pointing out the reality of it. Yep. Okay. And that's part of the something else I want to talk about today is the horror aspect of it. Right. Of how do you, the definition of 19th century horror, I think, is very different than what we think of when we think of horror now.
Yeah.
And even where these stories have ended up. And that's why we chose these four authors and these four groups of writing to focus on, because Jekyll and Hyde, Dracula, Frankenstein, and Poe have all become, everyone's familiar with them. So even if they haven't read the original books, but then there's the whole question of how they've been twisted, and they're different stories now when you see them than how they were originally written. And originally, 19th century horror is a psychological discussion. It's what you were just getting into, theological aspects, and there's a lot to unpack there that I would argue is not true of horror today. Not of all horror. I mean, I'm not broadly, I guess you end up with a spectrum of horror, right? Where you have the, mystery is somewhere on there. So depending on your mystery, if it's like a thriller, right? You've got that kind of on the horror spectrum of on the very low end of horror, usually. Not always though. And so then you've got some, like, my murder mysteries are on the low end of horror. They might be seen as horrific by some people because it is examining what brings a person to the point of murder.
Yeah.
Right. And then you've got the thrillers that usually push that envelope a little more. It's all about flipping the book and getting to the answer to the question. And then you have like psychological horror, like Sixth Sense, right? I remember when Sixth Sense came out, it was mind blowing to people.
Yeah.
But it was also one of the few horrors that I can watch because it's a psychological horror instead of a graphic horror. I guess that would be the difference to me. But then, like, also my background is in editing Arkham horror. So Lovecraft horror. So I've read all of Lovecraft. I would not choose to read that out of any like that is not something I enjoy reading at all. And I'll be the first to admit I was a terrible editor for those but I enjoyed reading those books because of the historical aspect of it. It was all, I think it was like 1930s, 40s. So it's all like prohibition and that time period. And I loved that aspect of it, but then it was bringing in the monsters and that kind of thing. And then you have like, so the question becomes, when did like Jekyll and Hyde, it has switched now from being what it was in this psychological, deep, theological thing where you're questioning humanity, and morality and justice and all of these things. Now it has become it's about split personalities, which isn't even true, but it's about, it's just about good versus evil and Hulk. I mean, Hulk is the biggest example of Jekyll and Hyde in our modern set, right? He is literally a scientist who turns into a beast, right?
Yeah.
But even in Marvel, they're constantly questioning that, right? And then in She-Hulk, taking it even further of where does that split happen and how much control do they have over the other?
Yeah.
So anyway, but so horror. So how do you define horror, Corin?
Yeah, horror is not my favorite.
Yeah.
So to me, it would definitely be more of the psychological aspect of it, because that's the only kind that I could probably watch as well or read, like The Sixth Sense. And I am a very visual person, so it's easier for me to actually read horror than watch it because the image will stay in my head. I wouldn't necessarily, for me, I wouldn't feel like Jekyll and Hyde was horror per se. I would think more thriller or suspense, because it's so psychological and it's not like visually trying to overwhelm you with fear or horror.
Right.
It's much more of like shaking things up and making you feel like the ground is kind of being pulled out from under your feet, which is a really horrible feeling, but it's a different kind of horrible feeling than just seeing something completely like a slasher
monster or whatever. Yeah.
Something like that. So I would probably, it'll be interesting to read Dracula next month and compare that, and then even Frankenstein the following month, and just even try to trace like my feelings about modern horror from these three sort of archetypal books, because they are, I think, going to be pretty different from each other. Dracula's going to be a lot more involved, and it's going to involve more of like, I don't know, this is more sciencey supernatural, whereas Dracula is more like full on supernatural. So it'll be,
well, and it's like gothic romance more, right? Isn't that kind of the base of the story? Frankenstein though is kind of like this one, where it's scientifically based, right?
I think so. It's been so many years since I've read Frankenstein that but I believe so. It'll probably be more of a middle ground between the two, because I think there is more it's a much more developed story in some ways than Jekyll and Hyde, and so there's more characters, and I think there is a romantic plot there, I think.
Which we'll get into that, but but well, like what Jesse just said, we're in 19th century. I'm not a huge fan of modern horror, or the gore. That was the word I was trying to find, Jesse. Thank you. So graphic gore, right? How it's all about blood and guts everywhere, and really scaring the crap out of people, that kind of thing. But I can read Frankenstein and still sleep at night. Exactly. I can read Jekyll and Hyde, and I'm not going to have horrible nightmares that night about me splitting into somebody else or something, like it's not. And I think I'm going to be able to handle Dracula. Full forewarning, vampires is one of the things I don't do well. I don't like vampires. I don't like I don't like it. So it'll be interesting to read it. But what I'm expecting is, I'm also reading like Northanger Abbey right now, and it's talking about gothic, that whole gothic horror time period, and I'm expecting that out of Dracula. But anyway, right now, slasher horror is the worst. Exactly. That's just I don't even want to go there. But right now we're talking about Jekyll and Hyde. Okay. So, before we go too far off the deep end. Okay, let's see. So bringing you back, let's see. We were talking about like Utterson. So Utterson, Jekyll and Hyde. one of the things I wanted to talk about was it's such a small cast of characters, right? Those are our three main characters, and two of them actually are one person. So and then so really the other characters that come in, like Doctor, what's the Doctor something with an L?
Lanyon.
Yeah,
Lanyon.
Lanyon.
Yeah.
He's really the only other main character or tertiary character, right?
Yeah.
That is named, that has a presence in the novel, that has a purpose in the novel. And also is it Poole is the butler?
Poole, and then Mr. Guest as well.
And Mr. Yes.
Clerk. Yep.
Yes. So, but other than that, it's Utterson, Jekyll and Hyde, right? That's who the story is about. So looking at the description of each of them, I know they're very sparse descriptions, but to me, I may not be able to picture them physically, and I think that's okay. I think the reason he doesn't really describe their facial features or what they're wearing, for one thing, he never describes what they're wearing because they're gentlemen in 19th century society, and so you know what they're wearing, right? It's not important, right? And then I think he generally doesn't really describe their faces, right? The only description of Hyde that we ever really get is that he's small or dwarf-like, right? Yeah. But then he goes deeper and he'll just choose certain words to describe all of them, but it's more about describing their character than it is about them physically. So were there any particular descriptions that like jumped out at you, or any thoughts?
Well, I do agree with you. It's very atmospherically written, and
atmospheric. There you go.
Yeah, almost the descriptions of like the street, the lands, like the cityscape.
Right.
It feels like it almost kind of blends into the description of the characters, and so they're all part of this sort of emotional, sort of spiritual space together, which is really fascinating how those lines are blurred. It's not like you have really distinct like descriptions of people and then buildings, and then it's like everything kind of gloms together into a big foggy sort of
foggy London town.
Foggy London, yes.
Right, yeah.
So I did feel like I had more of a sense of Jekyll because I think he is described as kind of being a handsome, like kind of bigger guy, and then Hyde was the smaller. And so I felt like those descriptions were like helped me to visualize them, maybe not like in precise detail, but there is a sense of like Hyde is displeasing, Jekyll is pleasing, physically pleasing to look at.
Yes.
And so there's like a definite correlation between who they are inside versus and their externals. There's actually not a duality. There's not a duality there. It's actually what they are.
Yeah. No, I agree. That's it. That's right there. The fact is he bases his descriptions on the inside of a person.
Yeah.
So the outside reflects what is inside, right?
Yeah.
But while still asking the question of how often is it not true? Right.
Well, yeah, and also
because within Jekyll, Hyde came out of Jekyll and is Jekyll, right? So even though they look different on the outside, technically they're the same person.
Well, also it was described in the book that Hyde is small and youthful because the sort of the dark side of Jekyll has not had time to sort of grow.
That's right.
And so as I feel like towards the end of the book, it's kind of said that Hyde has grown a bit and is more coming. So even that is kind of making a statement about what's inside of him. But at the same time, the whole idea of like duality and there being two sides to everything. After reading the book a third time, I felt like there's an element of the story that contradicts that, where you have good and evil really intermixed, because you have someone like Enfield who is sort of like he could be almost like a Hyde character because he has a lot of vices, but he also does good things. Like he pursues justice. He's the one who collars Hyde, after he knocks the girl down, and he's the one who, like, when he's walking the empty streets at night, suddenly longs for a policeman, which is another interesting note. That there's a sense in which the law is longed for by people when things are dark and lonely and they feel afraid. And so even in someone like Enfield, there's an honor and a nobility, but then there's also his darker side that you don't hear much about.
Mhm.
Even Utterson, there's a moment when he's like reflecting on all the bad things he's done and feels like almost like it's a coming to repentance moment for him.
Yeah.
So he's even reflecting like, and Jekyll obviously isn't completely good because Hyde came out of him. So like the whole idea of duality is actually kind of played with throughout the whole book. There's a sense in which these characters and this world that's being described, the good and evil, are kind of intermixed and are all of a piece. And yeah, there's some question about whether even Hyde has some good in him at the end, or is able to,
Exactly.
is able to recognize that he has lost touch with the good. And therefore, one of the things that I also wanted to make a note of is that wine in the story is a symbol of fellowship.
Mhm.
The friends are constantly drinking wine together,
Mhm.
and they're inviting each other to dine with one another, and Hyde is never invited. There's a
Mhm.
line where I think Poole says, "Oh no, he never dines in the house. He never." Um, and so Hyde is very isolated,
Mhm.
and there's a deep feeling of I guess loneliness in his life. I don't know that he feels that, but definitely at the end, there must be a sense of like despair in him or hopelessness over something that, because otherwise he could just break out of the house and try to be a fugitive. Like he's wanted for murder, but there's no reason for him to kill himself. Like he could go and try to escape the law. Instead, he does himself in. So I don't
Yeah.
know. There's much more conflict there than one might think.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. Well, and like you said, the duality in all of us, right? And
yeah,
that's ultimately what I think Stevenson is trying to show. Because then, like you said, with like Utterson, he starts thinking back through his own things, and
yeah.
there is a Hyde inside of him, right? There's a Hyde in all of us.
Mm,
Kind of the ultimate thing is that we all have the Hyde element in us, but so does good always overcome evil in ourselves? And
mm,
depend on how much we feed the evil side, right?
yeah,
So by dividing it, you get to see the Jekyll versus Hyde. But again, Jekyll is not pure good, so
yeah,
you can't do that. But there's the element of how Hyde is, yeah, he's deformed. So the two descriptions that I was thinking of, and again, it's it even starts with he is not easy to describe. There is something wrong about his appearance, something
mm,
displeasing, something downright detestable. I never saw a man I so disliked, and yet I scarce know why. He gives a strong feeling of deformity, although I couldn't specify the point. So it's like if you could see the dark side of yourself, what would it look like?
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
would it look, and is it a smaller being, or have you fed it enough
yeah,
that it's actually what's on the outside, even,
yeah,
you know? Um,
yeah.
yeah.
And also
And
the deformity is something that people sense more than anything that can be measured about you. And so
right,
it's not even like, what are people seeing exactly? So Hyde can't even
right.
necessarily like, this is such a pun, but like Hyde can't necessarily hide himself. Like
Yeah,
he's,
yeah.
because it like
It's part of his name. I think that's why. Yeah,
at the end, this Poole thinks that Hyde is wearing a mask, but he's not wearing a mask. It's just
right,
him.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's so,
Yeah.
yeah, to look on pure evil.
Yeah.
If you looked on a demon's face, what would you see? That's probably what you would see, is something so wrong that you
Yeah.
can't put your finger on it,
Yeah.
right? You
Yeah.
know? Um, but the fact that everybody in the book is described with that duality, with that, like the first description that I gave of Utterson, right? Where it's, well, he has all these features, but he's also lovable,
Mm.
right? So you might think, well, he's dusty and he's kind of an old man, but he's lovable. There's something about him that is eminently lovable,
Yeah.
right? And so there is this, oh well, this person is but ugly, but inside there's something that is so. Have you ever found that, like, when you meet somebody and you might not be attracted to them immediately, like not on a romantic level? I'm just saying, you look at somebody and you're like, you know, I don't know, oh, I'm just not drawn to that person. But then you start having a conversation with them and you're like, oh my gosh, we're like kindred spirits. I love you so much,
Mhm.
right? You
Yeah.
get to know somebody, and and it's just like, that might not be I'm not attracted to you on a physical level, but I am attracted to you on a spiritual level, on a, on a moral level, where
Yeah.
I'm like, psychologically, yes, I totally get you and we're on the same page. And
Yeah.
so there's a different level there to
Yeah.
humanity, right? I think that in the end we're all connected
Mm-hmm.
somehow spiritually, right? We all have the same beginnings.
Yeah.
Um, and if you're a Christian and you believe that we all come from Adam and Eve, then we all come from Adam and Eve. So we're all connected. And
Yeah.
so that essence of, we're all formed and created in God's image. And so when I look at a person, even if they're exhibiting evil tendencies, they're
Yeah.
still created in God's image. So I can see there is a beauty to them.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm reminded of that passage in when I think that's when they're going after Hyde for the murder. I'm not precisely sure, but it talks about how much whoever's speaking, I can't remember if it's Enfield or Utterson, but they long for the presence of their fellow creatures. They long for other human beings. And
Yeah.
that's isolation is like a ongoing theme in the book. And Jekyll was isolated like for years before he even succeeded in becoming Hyde, because he and Lanyon fell out like a decade before the novel began. And there's kind of an interesting like progression of increasing loneliness, and even the fact that Jekyll's like his laboratory takes place in this abandoned like dissection theater where there used to be a bunch of eager students learning about the anatomy of the human being, and now there's just Jekyll alone messing with his anatomy through chemistry, and it's just in total hidden solitude. So it's isolation is
Well, and with Lanyon, the whole point of they used to be friends, and then they go their separate ways because of a scientific debate, right? They
they do,
disagree, but in the end, the only person that Hyde/Jekyll can turn to is Lanyon, right?
Yes.
He has to have his help,
Mm-hmm.
and so he reaches out from his loneliness, right, and reaches to the only person who he knows on some level you will understand this.
Yeah.
To the form that it scares him to death, literally, but it's still that scientific passion is a connection between them.
Yes.
Right? You will understand on some level what is going on here, but you might not completely understand it. When their passions become their face. That's a good
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Yes.
And then like the baker, absolutely. So one of my characters in my book, I deal a lot with loneliness, and in the Spokane Clock Tower Mysteries, it's a lot about a lot of the themes through it, and it comes from Jekyll and Hyde. I have them discuss Jekyll and Hyde and discuss Les Mis, which is another one that deals with false representation and putting on a mask. Right? There's so many books. That's a thing right there. Okay, 19th century literature is full of people wearing masks in different ways. Okay, you got Mask of the Red Death, but you've also got Telltale Heart, and you've got and then you're gonna end up with Dracula and Frankenstein and Jekyll and Hyde and Man in the Iron Mask and Les Mis, and all of these stories. In the end, there's this theme of wearing a mask, and I don't think that theme has gone away. I think that is still a very modern theme. Not just because of COVID and wearing masks, but that was literally a thing that people would talk about, was how, oh my gosh, this you lost your humanity, right? People wearing masks. That was a whole discussion a lot of people got into, was the feeling that they couldn't identify with people anymore, even though you can see their eyes just by covering half of your face. You lost a sense of who the person was. But I think we all wear masks, right? I'm a different person. I was a different person in college than I am now. And I'm a different person around my husband than I am around my kids. And I'm a different person, around you and than I am around other friends, or than I am here online. I'm not a completely different person, but I am choosing what part of myself to present. Right. And I think we always do that. So,
Although there might be a question about how efficient we are at actually creating a mask.
Yes.
I mean, we think that we're doing it, but I feel like the reality of who we are still kind of seeps out. And it's kind of like what they're talking about, how people just have a sense of Utterson is lovable and Hyde is not. It's a sense that people have. regardless of that first impression that you were talking about, what it first is to meet someone. So there's a sense of absolutely mask wearing, and then there's kind of that, again, that kind of like turning that inside out a bit and saying, but you really can still get a sense of someone too.
Right.
There's an essence there
Right.
that you can grasp. So
Yeah.
yeah. When it comes to the sort of the development of character, and kind of to take it a little bit theological, and I'm not a theologian, but one of the interesting things, just I know that Stevenson had a Calvinistic background, and so Calvinism is, I think, the doctrine of human depravity. So as human beings, we're so depraved that we can do nothing outside of God's grace and sort of saving work. We're always going to be inclined to evil, which is not the same as other doctrines. And I think older Christian doctrine had more of like a sense of human beings, we are like affected by sin and evil, but we have this power to choose between good and evil, and we can become holier or we can become less holy. And there is a little bit more weight given to human free will. And I find both of those themes in Jekyll and Hyde. One of the interesting comments is that the powder that sort of does the transformation is said not to be a powder that chooses good or evil for you, that whatever is already in you comes out. And Jekyll obviously has an evil Mr. Hyde come out, but he kind of is wondering, like, is this me? Like, was this just in me? And was this because of me? Like, that I had this evil in me? If I had been a nobler person, could it have been a better person that came out of me? Which I just thought was an interesting thing, because you could basically, I liked looking at it through those two different theological lenses of like, is there sort of a base point to human nature where we're all worse than we think? And that's more of the truth about us? Or is there also this unfolding of our choices that actually does like deeply shape us as human beings to being, I mean, in some ways more good or more evil over the course of our lives? And so, yeah, that was just kind of.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned the powder, right? And it turns out that the powder, it wasn't a pure form, right? Isn't that, he says?
Yeah, it was impure.
It was an impure form. So because of that particular powder, right, he can't ever do it again, because it wasn't a perfect powder and all these other ones were. And so, yeah, so would he, but it's not like because then he uses the pure one, he could have pulled out the good part of him instead of the bad, right?
Yeah.
It's like it had to be that impure in order to pull out the bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Although, would it have worked at all if it had the pure one?
Right. And in the end, that's what it says, is that it didn't, right? It won't work unless it's impure.
Yeah.
Right? It needed that impurity factor to,
So only through the flaws was that even possible, really?
Right. Which is also very Christian, know, that God chooses imperfect people, right? We're all sinful, and and even once we're saved, we still make bad choices, right? But we're still trying to live the best way that we can. Unfortunately, we're all sinful, and so we don't all make good choices. But praise God, I don't have to be perfect, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, you were getting into like the predestination versus free will, right? That whole question. I remember going a lot into that at Whitworth, right? And talking about, which is it? And I think in the end, I think it's one of those. I believe in a very paradoxical God. I believe that I don't have the answers, and God's not going to give me the answers to everything, right? And so in the end, it's a lot of, you know what, God, you know what you're doing, and so I'm just going to trust that you somehow this works out where we can have predestination and free will at the same time. I don't get it.
And to take it a few steps away from theology, the question could just be a question of like fixed or dynamic human nature. Is human nature something that's just there, that's a kind of more almost like, I don't know, is it like the literary, is it like Thomas Hardy and Tess of the D'Urbervilles and naturalism, that's just human beings were just sort of fated for things? Or there's a whole sort of literary, I feel like there's a whole sort of literary world that kind of goes after that versus kind of a more dynamic kind of like, no, you can be different.
Right.
Where you can make choices that that will shape your life for the better or the worse, and
Right.
that more dynamic, which I agree with you. I think we don't have to have the answers, and it's really both of these things are just interesting lenses to look at a story
Right.
through.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
yeah,
and it comes back to horror.
yeah,
Really, that's the question of horror, right? At least 19th century horror, where horror as a genre started, I
yeah,
think, is a lot is asking that question of morality and
yeah,
humanity, and because ultimately that's what horror is. Sorry, let me piece this together. So horror is asking the question of how far can we go where we're still human, right?
yeah,
How dark, how bad, what darkness can happen. Because then you get into the horror stories that are questioning, like, can Godzilla have a soul, right? And is there a good side to Godzilla? you know,
yeah.
and is there a good side to Frankenstein or Frankenstein's
Mhm.
monster? Sorry, um, and
Yeah,
and then back to Hyde, right?
yeah,
Ultimately, the story ends with, was there some good in Hyde?
yeah,
Um, was there an aspect of him where he was just lonely, and he was just um, seeking companionship in a different way than what
yeah,
society was saying you can't do that,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And I think that's where that whole mask thing again is with the 19th, because in the end the whole story is about, it's all men, okay, and it's
mhm,
all men dealing with 19th century restrictions, right?
mm,
So you're the upright man wearing that. I mean, they literally are wearing tight collars and wearing, I mean, women complain about wearing corsets and wearing, 19th century clothing. But I tell you what, the men had it just as bad, if not worse, because they had more pieces. There are so many pieces to your outfit in 19th century it's all restrictive.
mm,
It's all about the posture and about how you're presenting yourself, all about your presentation, and
mm,
what of you are you presenting to the world, especially in England, right? England is still known for being a very not restricted, what's the word, reserved, right?
mm.
A very reserved society of people where you don't express certain parts of your life, you just don't talk about it, right? And you don't let that part out for people to see,
Yeah,
right? Americans, I think, are much. I mean, that's kind of one of the complaints you'll get in Europe about Americans is we're very loud and boisterous, and we'll talk about anything,
yeah,
right? And certain European society, but I mean, Asian, African, anywhere, South American, you're going to get different societal implications of what are you allowed to present in front of people and what aren't you allowed to present in front of people.
yeah,
I mean, my kids and I just studied ancient Egypt, and that was really interesting, talking about that aspect of ancient
yeah,
Egyptian society,
yeah,
and women pharaohs wearing the beard and the hat in order to, because that was a symbol of being in charge and being right. So you
mm,
had to dress a certain way and present a certain way,
mhm,
and it's just one of those. There is nothing new under the sun.
yeah, yeah,
Nothing has changed. We are always dealing with that question of what makes us human,
mhm,
and morality, the
yeah,
question of good and evil. So yeah, stiff upper lip. Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Godzilla is just a mommy protecting her kids. Exactly. Poor Miss Godzilla. She's just trying to feed people.
Oh, well, it's interesting because nowadays we have all these villain origin stories, but literally Jekyll and Hyde and Frankenstein are both villain origin stories. Like
Yes.
it just describes how these evil people came to being. I'm not sure if Frankenstein the monster was actually evil or not. I can't remember that well enough.
Right. Well, and and that's going to end up being one of our questions.
Yeah,
Is because then there's also the question of whether he has a soul or not.
yeah.
Right. Which it's the ultimate. I mean, Frankenstein's monster is the first AI, right?
Oh
When
yeah,
you think about it, it's the AI question
yeah,
of with the uncanny valley. It's too similar to a human being, and so they don't like it, right? And so the AI question of when does it become so sentient that it has a soul,
hmm,
right? Which is
yeah,
getting into science fiction, which is that whole thing again about like where science fiction, fantasy, and horror are three different ways of examining humanity,
Mhm.
and asking those questions
Mhm.
of what can we do? Why would we do it? How would we do it?
Yeah.
And should we do it?
Yeah.
And so there we go, Jekyll and Hyde again, about the ultimate scientific question of if I can do it, I'm going to do it just to prove that I can.
Mm.
Right? It's the A bomb question of
Mhm.
you know of science. That's the thing is should he figure out how to split humanity into two souls? You
Mm.
know, well he's going to do it so that he can
Yeah.
prove to Lanyon that he can.
Yeah.
Right? But Lanyon is saying, but should you?
Mm.
Right? Even if you can, should we really do that?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
It kind of reminds me, this is a little bit not off topic, but just the questioning of social media by some of the people that were some of its creators or kind of came up with some of the algorithms. Now they're not sure if it was such a good idea.
Yeah.
There have been some documentaries about that. So it is, I mean, I'm not sure that Jekyll had positive altruistic motives for creating this powder. Um, but even with projects that are like, oh, this is going to be good for humanity. Um, yeah, there's that question of if you can do it, does that actually mean that you should?
Right.
Which is a question of like almost like right and wrong versus human freedom, and if those two things represent their own duality and whether those two things can be separated or not.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. So in some ways, Jekyll and Hyde is also science fiction.
Yeah, ask those questions for
Right?
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it has a basis in science. So it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see if Frankenstein is also like
Mhm.
because when you go back far enough in the genres, right? So you've got 19th century is when uh, books become books, right?
Yeah.
And mass produced, right? Before that, you've got Regency era and Jane Austen and her books and things like that. And it's more of a self-publishing industry, right?
Mm.
It's limited print runs. It's
Okay.
not mass producing. Um, which if you want to learn more about that, watch my talk with Leah from I think was that last week. I talked to a gal who does book conservation and reconstruction. We got into the history of books. It was fascinating. But we kind of got into that where 19th century is books. And so uh, so now we see the beginnings of a lot of the genres,
Mhm.
right? And so before that, you have very limited choices of genres and how you define them. But then in the 19th century is when you get Poe beginning the mystery genre and the horrors is also but I mean it was before Poe, but it was also very much became a thing with Poe and all these ones that we're reading. Um, and then mystery, beginning of mystery and all of that. And then you've got science fiction with Jules Verne. And then you've got so then it becomes a question of fantasy, like where does fantasy start and all of that. That's a whole
Yeah.
discussion. But it's interesting. Um, yeah, asking those questions of how do you define this book, right? It has
Yeah.
so many layers, like you
Yeah.
said. There's so much to unpack. So
Yeah.
it just becomes a classic, right? Because it's so hard to define.
Yeah. I think to me it would feel more like horror if I felt like Stevenson was truly trying to sort of flip good and evil or like but I don't feel like he's doing that. I feel like in a lot of ways he's underscoring sort of like a traditional take on good and evil.
Right.
Um, and yeah, when I first read it, it was a little bit creepy just because Hyde was doing these really terrible things. And um, there was this question in me of like, where's the author coming from? Is he wanting to say that we should all be Hyde? We should all be like
Right.
totally like is Hyde the true free person who can just do whatever he wants and that's supposed to be the good thing? Like
Hmm.
is he flipping around morality in that way? And by the time I got to the end of the story, I was like, he isn't. I don't
Right.
I don't think he is.
Yeah.
Stevenson was definitely I don't think he was a Christian. He definitely had he was steeped in Christianity, but
Right. But
um
everybody went to church at that time. It's not.
yeah,
It didn't have to be an actual personal faith, the way
yeah,
that we talk about it now, right? Where,
yeah.
yeah.
And I don't think he is like radically departing from a Christian understanding of good and evil. Like I
Right.
think that's it's very much embedded in the story that, which one of the things that was interesting that I read, and I don't know how you would respond to this, but there were moments where it almost felt like he was saying that Hyde represented kind of like this freedom of humanity to go and do what we really want to do.
Yes.
Like we really want to go and bludgeon someone to death with a walking stick. And I'm like, I don't like that has never crossed my mind. I mean,
Okay. So have you heard of intrusive thoughts? Have you heard of that term?
Intrusive thoughts I think of as unwanted though.
Yeah, but when you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off and you think, man, I just want to ram into them.
Oh, that.
The Hyde part of us would do it. Would
Maybe.
Ram them off the road.
I guess part of my thinking was it would almost be easier for me sometimes to relate to Hyde's badness if he was tempted by other things that weren't so dramatic. Because
and did he choose those things, like you said? Did Stevenson choose to focus on those things to make clear his absolute evilness?
Yeah, his total depravity, which I guess that was part of the disconnect for me, was like, there are people out there who are probably like, because there are people who kill people, there are murderers. I think of that almost, you're getting into the like pathology a little bit, like
sociopath versus psychopath
and everything like that. And there's that question: is Hyde like? I mean, this story is not about any kind of mental illness; it's about human nature.
Right.
So I do understand that. But sometimes I just think, man, he's just so evil, and yet at the same time, I do feel like what's interesting is when Utterson goes up to him and asks for his, like, I think his name and address. Hyde gives it to him.
Yes.
And there is this connection between them. And I'm like, I feel like Hyde actually sort of wants to be reached out to by a nice person.
Right.
I mean, maybe that's just me reading into it, because I'm like, Utterson is a nice guy and he is loved by people.
So that's a good question. Like if Hyde had made connections with good people, because like his landlady doesn't care, right? Just she doesn't care what he's up to. In fact, that's the other description I was looking up. Yeah. So she's described as an ivory-faced and silvery-haired old woman opened the door. So first thing that goes into my mind is some nice little old lady who's a landlady. Then the next line says she had an evil face.
Yeah.
Smoothed by hypocrisy, but her manners were excellent.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, right there. You just described a person, like down to like, I'm like, okay, no, there's other layers to this woman.
Yeah.
Literally just the landlady.
Yeah.
And so that's where I was going with the whole, like, I think his descriptions are there's layers there.
Well, especially considering that like a few pages prior, he had just described Sir Danvers Carew, the murder victim. And he also, like, there's a similar description of like a silvery-haired man, but he's very good.
Right.
He's very good. And so that was interesting. I did notice that. I was like, he's describing two people who are physically very similar, but have a completely different kind of moral atmosphere about them.
Right.
So,
Yeah. So do we have moral atmospheres? That's can you, and I would argue we do. I mean, do we have, Val, quiet. Sorry. Val, quiet. Sorry. And Andrew will handle it. I'm going to mute it. You talk for a minute.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess my friend has abandoned me to to this discussion by myself. Now that I'm completely in control, what shall I do? How many of you guys have actually read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? Trisha? You're not back.
Okay. Yes, I'm back.
Okay.
Okay. But yes, that's a good question. We've had a couple different people, lots of people saying that they've never read it.
Oh, okay. I haven't been paying attention to the comments.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. Dog has to let us know that somebody's walking near our house. So that's her Jekyll. That's her Hyde side, getting fierce. And then her other side is her Jekyll side that just lies around doing absolutely nothing most of the day. So she's a rug we occasionally feed. So so I'm sorry. So let's see. We were talking about and I wanted to Angelique had this one. My first reaction is never my best. I like the pause. It gives me time to think of who I am and who I want to be. Yeah. and I try not to let the circumstances change who I am. And that's always the question, right? Of who are we putting forward? So I guess what I was about to say was, I feel like there are times when I meet somebody and you get that bad feeling.
Yeah.
And you're just like, yeah, I'm not going to pursue a relation. I don't want to know you any better. We're good. I'm going to meet you and we're going to
Yeah.
move on because there's just that, you were talking about the moral atmosphere.
Yeah.
Right. We have a moral atmosphere of somebody. And I think it gets more refined the older we are. Right.
Yeah.
And yet I think kids have a very good natural moral atmosphere. Usually a kid, the way they react to somebody in general, they seem to know when you're like, yeah, that person's not trustworthy.
Yeah.
Or not. And now caveat that with, it depends on how the child has been raised. I think if they've been raised in a safe environment, then they know what safety feels like. If they've been raised in an uncertain and unsafe environment, then they might be less to know what the difference is, to know where can I feel safe, because they haven't had that baseline, right? So they're always looking for that. They're always trying to figure out, where can I feel safe, right? Because you have that with adopted kids, where you bring them into your home and they have such a hard time settling in because they've never been in a safe, secure, steady environment.
Yeah.
So yeah, but as we get older, I think we do, you build that, it's like a palette. You build up your, what you can discern about people around you. And I think it comes from experience, right? You experience enough people over time. I think going to college is a big place where you kind of build up that palette, and you meet so many people from different walks of life, and you're trying to figure out who you are, right? At the same time as you're trying to figure out, who are all these people around me and how do I want to define myself, right?
Yeah.
I think that's why college is so important, is it is that chance to, or at least getting out there into the world, and like, I'm a big proponent for traveling the world, for going to other cultures and visiting other societies, and realizing that American society, even, oh my gosh, even Pacific Northwest, moving from the Pacific Northwest to Colorado, the environment, the society, the culture is so different. And I'm sure you noticed that moving down to San Diego, right? California is completely different from Tacoma, right? Or was it not? Because that's still coastal city. So maybe there wasn't as big of a difference.
Between Tacoma and San Diego?
Yeah.
No, there's a big difference.
Yeah.
There's absolutely a big difference. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so it's part of just meeting different people and meeting different, and realizing there's such diversity out there. And yet, in the end, people are people.
Yeah.
Just like as you're studying through history and reading different books, and, the reason why books are timeless, right? Why do we keep coming back to this? Why do we keep coming back to Jane Austen? Why do we keep coming back to Shakespeare or further back, right? Why are they timeless? Because people don't change. People are still experiencing the same things, but in different ways, right? Society changes, technology changes, all of that, but it's so similar that's what resonates with us. So, and I think that's why you and I both write character-driven novels. Right? We both write character-driven plot lines, because it's about the people, and that's what makes literature timeless. When it's about the people, when it's about what's happening right then in society, it tends to not last as long, I think.
Yes, unless the author is very, very good at tying in current events with good character. I mean, like, with good characters, because I think of Tolstoy, he wrote a lot, and Dickens wrote a lot about kind of the current times, but they were so great with character.
Characters.
It didn't matter. It didn't, because you read back, those novels are, especially Tolstoy, can be so specific to like imperial Russia, but it's like, it doesn't matter. It's, he uses all the contemporary stuff to explore his characters and just take society apart in a way that's, I don't know, even if it has nothing necessarily to do with my own now, it still feels like it teaches me something. So that's definitely great literature.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's see. I had a question that I'd started earlier. Oh, asking about the love story. Is the love storyline added to the musical and other versions? Yes. As I recall, no, okay, I lost it. Sorry, guys. But yeah, that was a question. And as I recall from the last time I did this discussion, which Kay is here. Hi, Kay. I saw Tori earlier. It was from, I think it's the play, the first time they do the play, which is like a year after the publication of the book. He published the play, 1887. So the book comes out in 1886, and then the play comes out in 1887. And in that one, they added women. They added 2 women, one that's virginal and respectful, and the other one who is a word that I'm not going to say, representing, and they parallel with Jekyll and Hyde. And so you have that whole love story added to it. And I'm sure that's because they've turned it into a play and they realized, oh, it's all men. So we need a female aspect in here somewhere. Whether that was the right decision or not, and how it's interesting. It makes it's one of those, again, getting into the whole discussion of different media, that a book is going to be, so again, nothing changes, right? You know how everybody argues, well, is the movie better than the book? Is the book better than the movie? Well, that goes all the way back to when they started making plays of books, right? I'm sure Shakespeare had problems, right? Oh, well, I liked the book better. So I liked reading the play better, but which I argue you should never read Shakespeare. You should always view it. It is meant to be viewed. But to view it and follow along with the words is really fun, because then you catch all of his innuendos and just double entendres, and oh my gosh, so much wit. There is so much wit in Shakespeare that is overlooked. But anyway, but yeah, so yes, that's the love story and all of that is added later. So if you've ever seen have you ever seen a musical or play version of Jekyll and Hyde?
No, never.
The musical is like a rock opera. It's
okay.
It's really good. But it's very different than the book. And yet exactly the same as the book, because it's just one of those, and so again, I wouldn't say that I like the musical better than the book, but I would say that I like both of them for very different reasons. They bring different aspects of it out to dissect and to look at, and different questions about it. And every version that has ever, well, not every version. No, that's the point. Not every version that has been acted. It hasn't always been one person. Nowadays, if you go see it, like the Jekyll and Hyde musical is one person playing both. And that's the big claim to fame, right? Is you go see it and you're like, oh my gosh, this guy completely changes. It looks like it's a completely different actor, right? Just because they changed the way they stand and the way they portray themselves. So even from way up in the, I never get close-up seats. I'm cheap, because I think you still get the same experience for cheaper. So I'm sitting way up here in the balcony, and still you can see the change in their aspect when they go from Jekyll to Hyde. And but that hasn't always been the case. Early movie versions would do 2 different people. So it was a small, smaller person who would, would be very, or wearing a mask or whatever. And then a tall, upright, perfect man. And then also very early on, being like, I think it's the 60s or 70s, we start seeing like it's Jekyll and Mrs. Hyde. So it's Dr. Jekyll and Mrs. Hyde. So you see, like when they did Elementary with Sherlock and a female Watson.
Yeah.
So it's, it's nothing new, guys, to swap the genders around and see how that changes things. But it's very interesting how there's no women in it. But I think in a way that simplifies it and makes it more about let's talk about this aspect and not focus on the difference between the genders, and were women more reserved than men and things like that. That's not the point of the book. It's about examining one man, but thereby examining all of humanity.
Yeah, kind of he's kind of an everyman character.
Right.
Yeah. So the only actual like Jekyll and Hyde shows I've seen. Do you ever see Wishbone?
Yes. Oh, yes. I have books somewhere.
I think they did a Jekyll and Hyde one, and then I think Carol Burnett did like a comedy sketch, Jekyll and Hyde, I'm not. Oh wow! I did not have
Did
those.
you ever read those? Yeah.
No, I did not. I would have loved those.
Oh
We
my
just
God.
watched the show.
They need to re-release Wishbone. That's like one of those. I'm like, okay, they must have lost them because otherwise, I mean, they've re-released. You could watch Reading Rainbow and Mr. Rogers, and it's like, okay, where is Wishbone?
Yeah.
That's why there's BookTube. I swear, we all grew up on Wishbone.
Yeah.
All our generation.
Yeah. That was one of my introductions to literature was Wishbone.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that was how I found out about Shakespeare. They did a Romeo and
Yes.
Juliet on Wishbone.
Yeah. Yeah.
I still remember him like walking around with a rose in his teeth.
I know.
Jack Russell Terrier.
I always loved when it was like the love stories like that.
Yeah.
Little dog.
Yeah.
Oh, I love you so much. Like,
Yeah. They did a Pride and Prejudice, and I think he was like in a little Regency doggy outfit and everything.
yes.
And
Yes.
yeah.
Oh my gosh. The seamstresses and costumers. Yes.
Yeah.
Props. Oh my gosh. Amazing.
Yeah.
They were so well done. But yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think they did do a Jekyll and Hyde one. And wasn't he Jekyll and Hyde?
What?
I think he is Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And honestly, I feel like I could be getting this wrong, but I feel like Carol Burnett also did this, and it was a Mrs. Hyde and Dr. Jekyll, or it was kind of the gender swap.
I think she.
I can't remember if it was like the good and evil part of it, or just for the fun of like two people turning into each other.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
That totally sounds like something she would do on her show. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Carol Burnett show. I've been rewatching through the Dick Van Dyke show. Love Dick Van Dyke. He's hilarious. Oh my gosh. Something about the classics. There's and you know what is it's timeless again. It's that whole there's a timelessness to it. And when it's focused, it's all about family life. It's like, yeah. The woman at home cooking and all of that isn't necessarily what's always happening now, but it's just the interaction between them as husband and wife. It's like, yep, that goes back to Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
I'm sure they argued about what are they having for dinner tonight? I don't know. Let's go get, what do you want? I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, pretty much. No, not that tree. Not that tree.
Right, not that tree.
I'd love to be able to just walk around the garden and get food. That'd be amazing. Not have to prepare it.
So let's see. Was there anything else that you had specifically that you were like, oh, let's talk about that?
I have my notebook that I wrote down so much stuff in. I don't think so. Like we covered a lot of ground.
You did.
And my notes, the problem is I take so many notes that I can't easily just dive into them and pick something.
I've got all my little tabbies, and I'm like, what did I mark?
Yeah.
Well, and this one has some great pictures and stuff too. I wanted to find some of those. Oh, here you've got what is her name from Casablanca?
Oh, Ingrid Bergman.
Yeah, Ingrid Bergman.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure who the other gal is, but doing so based on that outfit, I'm gonna guess. No, actually, one of them, Ingrid Bergman, might be the one that goes with Hyde. I can't tell if she's wearing a robe or not, because it would be nothing less than that at that point. But well, here we go. Here's Robert Louis Stevenson. So that's the author. Oh, you said where was he going with the story? Have you heard that it's based on a dream?
I think I read that in the introduction, actually.
Yeah. He had a nightmare and he woke up and he said it was a fantastic bogey story. And so then he goes on to, because he tells his wife, there's his wife. Yeah.
I think she told him to trash the first version, though.
Yes. Yeah. It was just a horror.
Yeah, it was just horror. It didn't have.
So, yeah. So that says something about then he got more focused on what does he want to do with it? What's the point of the book? Yeah. Right?
Yeah. Kind of suss out the meaning of it rather than just have it be horror.
Right.
Which is probably why it feels more like a psychological thriller than a horror.
Right. So I guess that would also beg the question of, let's see, at this point, this is after Poe. Before, I think this one came out before Dracula. I wrote down the release dates for all of them somewhere, but I don't remember where it was.
I think Dracula was 1897.
Yeah, so this is 1886.
Yeah.
When was Frankenstein? We should have read them in order.
Oh, that's like
just started with Poe.
That's like 1818 Frankenstein.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Very early. Yeah.
So Frankenstein actually is one of the first ones then. It is. Yeah. That would be because Poe is 30s, right? 1830s.
Yeah. There's an 1818 text for Frankenstein and then an 1831 revision. And the 1831 revision, I think, is the more famous one that most people read. Okay. And I think wasn't Poe beginning to write around that time, or I
34, 30, yeah, that era.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was just working on the timeline for mystery, and yeah, so I know he's in the 30s. I can't remember exactly when. It's like the mid 30s.
We're sort of working our way backwards because we're doing the two most contemporary ones, and then we're going to go back to
then we're going to go back. Yeah. That'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see. So 1897. So after, yeah. So that means, let's see, Frankenstein. So before Frankenstein, then it's going to be Austen, right? She's in the 1700s.
Well, Austen was publishing right before that because she died. I think she died in 1818 or 1817. But that was 1818 was when her last novel was published. Persuasion, I think, was published then. So she was publishing during those teen years
while she's alive.
While she was alive, right. She wrote some of her first drafts in the 1700s, but I think she was kind of contemporary with Mary Shelley, I think.
That's okay. That's what I was thinking. Okay, so because then she's referencing, so like Northanger Abbey is referencing Udolpho and all of those. So I'm just trying to think like what was horror before, for her to read his original and say that's just a horror. You can do better, right? So yeah. What would have been that definition? So then I want to ask the question of, was Stevenson inspired and influenced by Frankenstein? I think he absolutely was. If Frankenstein came first, if it had been around that long, he undoubtedly had read it. And it's similar. If you go by the base storyline, again, I have not read Frankenstein. If I have, it was like an abridged version in college, like that kind of thing. Same with Dracula. I swear I read it before, but it must have been abridged because we were just talking about, I just got it from the library and I was surprised by how long it is. So somebody was asking, what's the next buddy read? So we're doing Dracula next month. So if you want to join with us, read Dracula. So you can join in the discussion, and we're doing every third Thursday of the month is what worked out for our schedules. So at this point, that's what we're looking at is the third Thursday of April. Right? We're coming into April already. Man, this year is flying by for me. So we'll do Dracula in April, and then we'll do Frankenstein in May. So if you want to start looking for a copy, and like Corin said, so remind me again, there's two versions of Frankenstein.
Yeah. And I think we're going to divide it up between the two of us.
Yeah.
I'm going to be reading the 1818 and you're going to be reading 1831, and then we'll compare notes. And so if people want to follow along with us, they can choose one of those two texts. I think the 1831 is way more like out there in the library systems and stuff like that. 1818 is like kind of a recent kind of republication.
Exactly. I think they discovered an earlier manuscript, and so they
it was like the 200th anniversary of that version, and so they decided to kind of put it back out there again.
Okay.
So yeah, I got a Penguin edition that's like fairly recently published for that anniversary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. So I know Evie didn't hop on, but I know if you go to Evie's channel, she was one of the ones who talked with me and Kay and Tori when we did our discussion of Jekyll, and she has a tattoo that's got Northanger Abbey, Frankenstein, and Dracula, I think was the three on it. So, and I know she was saying Frankenstein is her absolute favorite book ever. Yeah. So if you want to know more about Frankenstein, go check out her channel, because I know she's got some things about that. But yeah, I'm very excited to get into both of these, because I just think it's going to be a really interesting discussion. And it's, I love talking about the classics because they're so influential. You take them for granted.
Yeah.
It does come back to the whole, there's nothing new. And so, there's the argument that, nobody can come up with a new idea, and that's true to a point. I think that we're always influenced by what we're reading and by what we're seeing,
Absolutely.
and, and what's going on in culture. And, that's why you end up with, 2 movies of the same type, happening. So like, 2 Jungle Books came out, and Bug's Life and Ants came out at the same time. And, you have, because people are in the same vein, we're all seeing the same things and have the same
Yeah.
ideas. So,
Yeah.
and right now there's just been, it seems like there's a lot of people reading Jekyll and Hyde. So I'm glad we got to do this.
Yeah.
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 So yeah. Let's see. Corin is working on building up his presence. So just follow me for now, and I'll definitely be sharing anytime Corin is anything, because my goal is to get him published in the next year. So we're going to encourage him in his writing, and we're so excited. So be sure to subscribe to my channel at P. Meredith Author. And if you go down to my recommended channels, you can find a lot of the people that were mentioned today. Evie and Kay and Tori, and eventually we'll get Corin up there. Andrew, my husband, his channel's down there. Thank you everybody who joined us. This was awesome. And looking forward to next time. Thank you for joining me, Corin, and doing this live in front of everybody. So this was Corin's first time on BookTube, so yay!
Thank you for helping me into this experience.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it was really fun.
We're doing it again next month. So
yes.
All right. So now we're gonna wave until it signs off. Okay. Thanks everybody.
Bye.
Bye.